but it's soft.
I can take it.
I know. Okay, we're getting close to time to go here, and again, thank you for being a good and faithful group. It's when they ask about the class, I talk about how interested, eyes up, looking at me, a lot of good feedback, and that's a fun class to teach, and thank you very much for that. It's been fun for me, and I'm going to have a little fun for a moment and just say, Megan and Colby, I need to see the two of you after class. My wife said, don't do that. I'll make them nervous the whole class. I saw your mom over at church, and she said, I told him, go and introduce yourself to him. So anyway, nice to meet you at your expense this morning. Sorry about that. Anyway, next week we are not meeting because it is July 4th. July 4th. Now, for those of you who are streaming today, because we're working with two or three different crowds here, one that I see, one that's signing in and streaming, maybe listening now or listening later, I have an announcement or two for those of you who are not in this room but hearing my voice now or later. One, you'll probably be receiving an email this week. Here for the people in person attendance, we have all validated our email address. Shake your heads at me, yes? Because that is the way you're going to get the code and the information to get access to the will and the trust process. Everybody got that? Shake your head here. Online, we're going to need you to confirm your email address. You'll probably get an email this week asking for that, and also asking for you to take your own attendance. We're taking attendance here each week, and we'll need to have you probably give a little check off week 1, 2, 3, and now week 4, and let us know how it's gone out there, because we need to work with our organization in California we're under contract with in getting the right material to you in how many pieces and so forth. And then most importantly, make sure you are signing in if you're streaming and attend week 6, because if you do not do that, it will not make any sense to you, when you get the material in the mail, because we're giving the instructions for what to do in the lesson 6, which will be on July 18th. So we're going to be communicating with those of you who are streaming, and those who are in attendance in person. Make sure you're here on the 18th as well, or it won't make sense to you. So that kind of makes sense. We got to have people understand the process if we're going to be able to move through it and you access some of the benefits of being here. Again, we're going to give some things out. Today we're going to talk about fun and spending and debt resolution, as you can see on the screen. And again, there are a couple of the gold banner sheets that you may want to look at and do a self-evaluation. Utilize what God has given us effectively and enjoy it carefully, or else. That's kind of doomsday kind of language. But remember what the verse says? If we are not wise and are careful in handling worldly wealth, who will trust us with true riches? God is watching. God's pie. Remember that? He's watching from the end of the table, not to slap us or to criticize us, but, how you doing with dividing up the pie? There's some other things in here. One thing that we usually give out after this class digitally by email to each of you is some electronic pieces that for budgeting and for investment and for that kind of thing, just things that are out there. But when Ray and I began to check it this week, 2 or 3 of them are out of business. That's the way it is in the electronic world, I guess. So I wrote to the person who put that together in 2019, and she said, "Oh, thank you for using it. I didn't know it was, And she's supposed to get a new one to me, so hopefully that will come probably, in a week or 2. And so getting some things like, some of you know Mint.com, EveryDollar, but there were some other ones we had in there. And one that I want to add that comes out of a podcast that I listen to quite frequently, a Christian organization. The book that we give out today is called Fields of Gold. Andy Stanley, how many of you recognize that name? Charles Stanley's son. This is his own story of how his mom and dad taught him to be a giver. And it comes in with 3 P's: priority giving, because you move to priority giving when you don't do this. You see the offering plate coming, you reach in your pocket, you go, what have I got? And you put it in. That is not priority giving. Priority giving is planning ahead. And it could be with electronically, like 65 or 69% of people here at Fellowship give with electronic bank transfer or a monthly charge off against your card or whatever it is. So you plan ahead to do it, priority giving. The second one is percentage or proportionate giving. We talked last week, excuse me, we talked last week about percentage giving, 10%, but actually there's another thing we should be looking at, and it was called what kind of giving or what kind of gift? Acceptable. God is wanting all of us to give an acceptable gift, okay? And not say, God, I gave you the 10%, I'm going to have fun with the rest of it and not ask you at all. That's why we did lesson 1. Who is the owner? Little midterm exam here, a pop quiz. God is the owner. We are the manager. We ask the owner what he wants done with his stuff. Okay, so you go priority giving. I plan ahead. It's in my budget. And some of the things we gave you on the acceptable sheet. It makes a difference. You do it regularly, systematically, etc. Priority giving, proportionate giving, and the last one is the ceiling breaker, and that is called progressive giving. And what Andy Stanley talks about in this book is that as we move along in life, later stages of life, and our situations change. For example, I've told you that Ray and our kids are in their 50s now. We have a boy and a girl. So our obligations are different. So as life changes, our giving should be progressive. And some people try to increase 1% a year, or some people set another goal along the way. That we just don't get stuck on 10%. There's a great illustration there. Now I'm kind of, if you gave the same tie to your dad for 50 years, how would he like that? No, you move ahead and you give a different gift that's fresh. And we do that with God as well in giving. And it's called, in Andy Stanley's words, progressive giving. So today we're going to move to pursuing financial freedom, and we'll define that not in today's lesson, but probably next time we meet on the 11th, which is the retirement one and planning for retirement, and how our goal at retirement is financial freedom, and I'll unpack that along the way with a sentence description. We'll talk about. Today fun, because the last slide we saw last week, there's only 3 places for your money to go. The first one is giving. The second one is saving or investing. And the third is fun. And remember I said, wow. Well, what do we do to deserve this, Tanya?
We ran out, so I made some more.
Oh, okay. If you need your coffee, feel free to get up. I'm going to pray in a minute. After that, go get your coffee or refill, whatever. Along the way, feel free. The last one is fun, and that is widely described. And I said it's more fun to drive here than to walk here. It was more fun last week to have the air conditioning on than now, because it's not on, and we're going to feel it here. If we could open the windows, we would. It's probably cooler outside. But we're going to talk about fun, but then the challenge side of it is wanting to have so much fun that we go into debt, and we have some suggestions, practical things on how to get out of debt today along the way. So let me pray. Again, thank God for His Word that informs us, and the Spirit to be our teacher, and for the joy of being together as a group here today. Thank you very much for coming. Loving God, you have said that your plans for us are good and pleasing and complete, as we hear in our key verse. And God, I pray that year by year, month by month, week by week, over the time that we spend with you, we would find that truth more deeply embedded in our lives. Thank you that we could spend 6 weeks talking about possessions and material things and finances and responsibility and eternal rewards. And I pray that as these dear people come week by week and take notes and listen and have a time to read some of the printed material, that would be a part of our formation and becoming followers of you who understand your heart, and then live that out in very practical ways by loving you generously and loving people around us generously. Thank you for our conversation today in Christ's name. Amen. Okay, pursuing financial freedom, fun, debt, and debt resolution. Now, fun, God intended that much of our money be used for fun. Now, we always think of the other side, well, God's taking 10% of my money. Well, actually, I mean, how much is left at our discretion if we do the tithe thing? That's what probably, as I said, most people, most evangelical Christians in America give 2 or 2.3 or 2.5%. Which, yeah, but thank you for shaking your head. It is sad, so they say, no, I need to have 97% that I can do anything I want. And that's not really what the message is biblically. And as we saw last week with the little thing on the board, I may put it on again. We have choices. God is watching. Doesn't make us do it. But he said there's a better way, and I invite you to do that. But God intended us to have fun with a lot of things. Here's our verse. We say it every week because it's the truth that we want to learn to live out, to not conform to the pattern of this world. Again, how is the world doing financially? Okay? Right. Don't conform to the world. It's a bad exhibit, a bad illustration to follow. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. How do you do that? Put things in our mind, ask the Spirit of God to apply it in our practical situations so we begin to think differently. The renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is. And as I pray, it'll be good, it'll be pleasing, and it will be complete along the way. And Ray and I'm going to say, Ray and I stand here wherever she is. I mean, we are living illustrations of that. Not that we did it perfectly, but we pursue that. And we've never regretted it. Now, we'll talk about that a little bit when we come to one of the points. It really is a pleasing journey if we're willing to believe God for that. So, what are the categories of fun that we might have? One, to bring restoration to our body and soul. And we have all heard, sometime recently or in the past, about just the principle of Sabbath. God says, take time each week to slow down and restore body and soul. That's part of what should be fun. And 2 words in something I read recently is that those days should be filled with fasting and feasting. Oh, I never thought about it that way. Well, fasting from what? Well, not necessarily food. Maybe fasting from electronics. Maybe fasting from the work you brought home. But somehow, so you put fun into the equation. No spouses shaking heads yes or no. I'm giving you a hard time, Tracy. About fasting and feasting. And it should be a time of food and inviting friends in and talking about how God has done, taken care of us in the last week. I like that little 2-part thing, fasting and feasting. Bring restoration to body and soul. To create memories for our family. The church group that we spent 43 years with before coming here to fellowship 10 years ago had an annual meeting. And I think I've told you, it had Swedish roots, Baptist group. People came over in the 1800s, still a very vital group, very aggressive in planting churches. They had an annual meeting. They moved east and west, West Coast, Central, East Coast, back and forth. And we took our kids because it was a family kind of conference every year. And we have great memories of camping on the Columbia River Gorge and getting up the next morning. And we went out and we didn't go, what are they doing? And they were They had a windsurfing tournament down on the river below us. So what a thrill that was for landlubbers from South Dakota, to see that. Anyway, creating memories for our family. That's part of what fun should be used for. To enjoy the beautiful world. And Tracy, you mentioned that in your question a couple weeks ago. Take a trip somewhere and enjoy what God has done. And that's a part of it. Enjoy the beauty that God has given in the world. And, I think of just a couple things that I've heard of recently. The co-leader of our community group that will be meeting tonight, he and his wife wanted to go on a 3 or 5 week tour to the national parks west of here. The only problem was they started too late and everything was booked up. But that's on their bucket list. Go and see the national parks. 4 guys from JBU, professors from JBU, men friends, went on a park tour here a couple of years ago, got in a car or van or something, and for, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks, we went to the national parks. Beautiful things that God has created that will refresh us just to get out and enjoy that. Experience new and different things. What is different? There's a lady in our church in California. They retired. Her husband was a manager of a bank, and she wanted to go to, it's either New Zealand or Australia, and bungee jump at 70 years of age.
Wow.
What is that? Do you know? Some of you know where that is. There's this bridge that. Yeah. Okay. You got to go and do it there, right? Tie yourself on a rubber band by the ankle and let her go. Her husband said, "No, thanks." Yeah. Right. So. But what is new and different along the way? Personal preferences. For 8 years before COVID, I was a part of a ministry going down out of fellowship, going down to a prison in Wrightsville, south of Little Rock, about 30 miles. And one of the guys I often rode with, he was saying his personal preference. He bought a Jeep so he and his 2 grandkids and his wife could go most weekends and look at old graveyards. Now, these are old graveyards that are on the back corner of a farm, but they're all in a registry called graves.com or something. And I said, well, how interesting is that? And he said, well, let me tell you one, and I'll give you a quick one. Here, he said, we went into this remote place, and there was a headstone, and it said this lady only lived 18 years. And then I found out the backstory, and I said, well, how'd you do that? Well, just investigate that name on graves.com. And here was the story. She lived in a small town, not many prospects for a husband, and this guy floated into town, and it sparked, and they got their wedding date set. But the night before the wedding, he skipped town. And she was so distraught, the next morning, she dove headfirst into the well and died.
Oh, wow.
All because of his preferences to go and look at. Anyway, so there are a lot of things out there, that are weird. I gave you another niche one. I play pickleball, and I was talking to a guy at JBU, where one of the places I play, and I go, oh, what do you do? He said, I play foosball. And the guy's about 70 years old. And I said, foosball? Oh, yeah. I said, well, he said, yeah, I'm like a professional at it. And I go, so like a week ago, I said, are there tournaments around, or what do you... He goes, well, there's one in Rogers this weekend, and there's one in this, and there's one in this, and I go, anyway, he goes, there's international tournaments in foosball. I go, whatever, preferences. I mean, life is so interesting. Don't be bored. That's nice. Okay. Fund spending could be broken down into needs and wants. And we got to unpack that along the way. Needs, food, clothing, and shelter. The verse I'll show you in a minute just says food and clothing, but food, clothing, and shelter is usually how we talk about it. Paul writes to the young preacher, Timothy, but if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. How does that work out in our world? Not so much, right? Not so much. Actually, clothing there, you could put in the word covering. For a while, I thought Paul wasn't worried about house to sleep because he was single, right? He didn't have to worry about it. But it means covering. But with food and covering, we'll be content. But not so much in our world. Number 2, the breadwinner has a biblical responsibility to provide for the family's needs, because we're talking about needs here. We need food, we need clothing, we need shelter. And the breadwinner. This very direct verse from Paul to the young preacher, anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Wow. Wow. When I think about that verse, we started out ministry too many years ago, a lot of years ago. But there was a man in that town who early on bought the fast food franchise for all of South Dakota. And he became a multimillionaire. But I also happen to know that his mother lived on the north end of town on welfare in a slum house. And there are other stories that probably we know in here. or not taking care of your family. And it's worse than an unbeliever. So, taking care of needs. We'll get to wants in a minute. Providing includes not putting your family at unnecessary risk. Again, Solomon, wisdom. There's another serious problem I've seen under the sun. Money is put into risky investments that turn sour, and everything is lost. In the end, there is nothing left to pass on to one's children, which is part of the goal of good financial planning. There's a man named Fred Smith who was a Christian business consultant in Dallas, and a man came to him and said, Fred, what should I do? I've got $7 million liquid assets, and somebody's come to me and said, I could double that in 18 months. What was Fred's advice? What do you think? What do you think the guy did? Yeah, 14 million. Actually, Fred asked him, what could you do with $7 million more that you can't do today? That's a good question, right? You know, what? Well, he went out, lost it all. Lost it all. Unnecessary risk. Solomon warned of it years ago. Needs are constantly changing in our culture. I'm going to show you a slide here. It's a headline getter, and we will take a long time to unpack it. But the headline is, mobile phones are more important than sex. That'll get everybody to go down the graph, right, and read what it is. But the point is, you look at the 4 things before sex, and they're all electronics. I got to have my phone. I got to have my TV. I got to have my internet. I got to have. And that's kind of the world. So it's not just food, clothing, and shelter. It's food, clothing, and shelter, and all the other gadgets we have around us all the time. Our wants are anything in excess of our needs. And that's kind of, hard to figure out. Just think of what was a want a few years ago, but now it's a need. And especially if you have kids. What does every kid have to have by age 8 or 11 or something? Yeah, I never had a cell phone and I survived. I know it's a different world. I'm an old person. but wants and needs are really confused in our society with our abundance and our, all the technology and so forth along the way. So it's tough to figure this out sometimes, but let's look at it. God may allow us to have many of our wants, but has not promised to provide them. And there's a verse that speaks to that. No wonder. Come on. It says, and my God will meet all your needs according to the riches of your glory in Christ Jesus. Now, I want you to ponder for a minute. If you are working with a new Christian and you tell him, why don't you read Philippians? That's a book about joy. And if you have some questions, let me know. And he comes back and goes, I read that verse, God will supply my needs according to riches of glory. Is that like a God credit card? Or is that a checkbook that what do you do? So, wise Bible, fellowship Bible people who've heard Philippians taught, what would you answer that young Christian? What are the riches of his glory in Christ Jesus? While I take a sip of tea, I'll wait. Okay.
Give back.
What, Sherry?
But you have to belong to him first.
So, what we need to unpack before answering is, what are the riches of his glory, right? And if you chase down that word study in the Bible, you will find out, if you reduce it all down, it is the church body. Paul said, writing to the letters of different letters, you are my riches in Christ Jesus. Okay, so what's the implication there? You could go to Acts 2, and it says, the early church, there was no one had anything in need because they shared all things in common. So they came to a meeting, somebody said, hey, I just lost my job, or got kicked out of my family, whatever. And Barnabas goes, oh, I'll sell that lot this week, and I'll have the money for you by Friday. Okay, whatever it was. Okay, but there's a very interesting implication in this for the church meeting the needs, particularly of its own people, but even beyond that. Does any of that make sense out of that verse? I hope it does, because at least that's the way Don Reed sees at least part of it along the way. God will meet your needs, and I could give illustration out of our life and lives of friends of ours where God provided with people with even a story I told in community group a week or two ago. 2 bags of grocery inside of a car that was locked. And the people didn't have any money to buy food. Our wants will change as we align our hearts with God's views. And a couple verses in here. Paul, do you have one verse, Psalm 37:4, listed in the book there? Or two? Is there one or two?
Mm-hmm.
Just one?
4, yeah.
Yeah, the other one I added, so I don't think it'll be in your book. You may want to add it. Psalm 37:4 says this, take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. What that talks about, the psalmist writing says, the more we align ourselves with God, the more our thinking changes and our desires will change. Okay, so just take that for a moment. Matthew 13:44 is the story about the field, the man who's walking across the field, and as Randy Alcorn puts it in his book Treasure Principle, he's walking along with his stick, and all of a sudden goes clunk when he's crossing a field. He goes, "What was that?" He digs into it, and he finds it was a treasure chest filled with money, whatever, treasure. And what does he do? Covers it up, and he goes, and the verse says this, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy, he went and sold all he had and bought that field. In the verses that are not in there, it says he didn't have the money to do it. But once he found what the potential was, he did what? Sold everything he had. But Randy Alcorn makes the point, it would be easy to miss in that story the 3 little words, and I thought they were in bold, but in his joy. And that's why last week I told you about Tom Monahan, Domino Pizza at the top of his field, and he saw the treasure in the field, and he sold it all in his joy, and his entire wealth is put toward getting more people into heaven, and he wants to die broke doing that. That's in his joy. Renee Lockey, what was the phrase? Work like a doctor, live like a nurse. And she said, and I think I read this to you, about her joy. She said, the hole I had in my heart 3 or 4 years ago, I don't have anymore. She was not giving up that 75% of her income. I wish I had that to spend. No, it was in her joy that she did that. And that's what is in that story that Jesus sold. In their joy, they sold all they had and bought the treasure when you get a view of it. Debt and borrow. Well, let me stop there just a second. In Randy Alcorn's book, Treasure Principle, and I scanned it again yesterday and couldn't find it. So if you read that book and you find him saying something like this, note down the page and let me know, because I would like to quote it. But here's what he says somewhere in that book. He said, once you get a hold of the treasure principle, which is you can't take it with you, but you can send it on ahead. Once you get a hold of that principle, you can never get enough of it. Okay? So kind of look for that if you get a chance to read that book. So as I said in the beginning, fun. We like to have fun, and God has intended much of our money to go for fun, but we kind of get too exuberant about that, and it's called debt, and we need to unpack that a little bit along the way. Debt and borrowing, God's view. Simple, straightforward. The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is a slave to the lender. That's the posture of being in debt from God's point of view. You will always be a slave. You say, I'm not a slave. Miss a couple house payments, and who comes knocking at the door? The master. We are slaves. When we are not financially free. And that God says, no hold back. There are 3 or 4 slides here. I'm going to read through them, and then I'm going to ask you where we are as the United States, because these verses were given to Israel as their economics 101. Okay? And when you set up the country, the Israelite nation, here's a formula for success and failure. And I skipped some verses, but you will get the impact of it. If you fully obey the Lord your God, and carefully follow all his commands I give you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations on earth. All these blessings will come on you and accompany you if you obey the Lord your God. The Lord will open the heavens, the storehouse of his bounty, to send rain on your land in season, and to bless all the work of your hands. You will lend to many nations, but will borrow from none. However, if you do not obey the Lord your God, and do not carefully follow all his commands and decrees I am giving to you today, all these curses will come on you and overtake you. The foreigners who reside among you will rise above you higher and higher, but you will sink lower and lower. They will lend to you, but you will not lend to them. They will be the head, and you will be the tail. Anybody see the picture? Who owns America right now? Yeah. We are a debtor nation. That's why many people are concerned with the direction of our country along the way. But that's an interesting scenario, picture drawn millennia ago about how to run a country. Do what God says, you're good. You're going to have surplus, and you're going to be a lender, and others will borrow from you. But you don't do that, you're going to go. Again, it underscores our key verse, do not do the way of the world, because we get on the cursed side of things with God rather than on his favor. Now, don't take that statement too far, because we're going to talk about debt and credit cards and mortgages and so forth. Don't read too much into what I just said. Debt presumes upon tomorrow. Listen, you who say today, tomorrow, we'll go do this or that, go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, make money. You do not know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You're a mist that appears for a little while and vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it's the Lord's will, we'll live and do this or do that. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. So this is under the title of we presume upon tomorrow. We were just about getting ready. Well, a couple years before we left California, the whole crash came: real estate, tech, economy, etc. What things were people presuming on back in 07, 08 that went off the cliff? Appreciation, yeah. And in California, that was crazy. There were 110% loans being made. That's okay, because you're going to appreciate 15% every year. We'll just refinance, That was one. Another assumption or presumption that was made. What? If I lose my job, I can get a better job, because that's the way it had been. Things are going to remain the same or better, presuming upon tomorrow. There's a really dark downside that I want to get to here in a moment. It comes under this title. It may deny future opportunities. If you listen to any financial programs of people calling in, which I do, and Christian and non-Christian, one of the plaints today, probably, 60% of the calls, what is the biggest debt that people are carrying in America right now? Student loans. Student loans. Now, that's bad enough. There's all sorts of people are going to have solutions of forgiveness and all that. I don't want to go there. But here's the dark side of it. We are in a Christian culture, and we probably support missionaries, support the idea of missionaries. Mission agencies are having a terrible time now in recruiting, 20-year-olds, because they come in with $120,000 debt for him and for her, or both, $240,000, and they go, you're never going to be able to raise support and pay off your student loans. So all of this easy money in college, secular or Christian, comes home to roost, and they become a slave to that. They say, go pay off your debt, then come back and talk to us about going to be a missionary. That's tragic if you think about that. Denies future opportunities, and people are trying to work on that. Some agencies trying to work out a forgiveness plan for years of service. Or get funding and endowment to pay it. It's a major problem. Debt is a symptom of overspending and undersaving. Pretty straightforward. You spend too much and save too little, you end up in debt. These little data points: only 49% of Americans could cover 1 month expenses if they lost their income. And I got a email on Friday from somebody here who has a relative somewhere, and because of COVID, lost her job, single mom, $14,000 in credit card debt. How do I get out of this? And that's, many people are living that close or under the line, underwater. The Bible does not directly give instructions on what debt is permissible and what is not. And I put down the name of a book here, Decision Making and the Will of God. And it talks about sanctified wisdom. Use your brain. God has given us wisdom. It doesn't say not to go into debt. We'll look at options here in a moment. But be wise. And here are some of the wise things, maybe. We'll get to that in a minute. Debt is a symptom. Okay, just the continuing of the list. On average, most families in the U.S. spend 103, I've seen it as high as 110% of their income. Okay, so if you're making $60,000 or $80,000 or $200,000 or $20,000, you spend more than that. On a consistent basis, you're going deeper and deeper into slavery, according to God. The average person is 3 weeks from bankruptcy. Little or no money saved, significant debt, totally dependent on next week's paycheck to keep afloat. And this is in the country, the richest country in the world, where we've had employment and jobs. And any of you see the posting this week of how much fast food people are making in Texas today? $50,000 because of a worker shortage. $50,000 to flip hamburgers. They can't get people to work. $50,000, probably a signing bonus too of $1,000. I don't know. We're a mess. This chart here is the savings rate for. I tried to find a more recent one, but couldn't from them. But the gray bars going up and down are recessions or depressions. The blue line is the savings rate, and you can see it for a period of time. What's the trend of where we live today? Not so much. Back in before 07, 08 in California, I remember seeing it was a negative savings rate for a while. It was below zero. And incredible, I don't even know how you do that. Interesting thing is, what happens at the gray bars? What happens right after a gray bar? Goes up. How long does it last? About a year or two. No, we're addicted to our consumption mentality, and that's that's why it's a hard thing to do in our culture without some good wisdom and courage from God along the way. When a person is overspending and undersaving, the result is death. That's no new news. Bill Hybels, former pastor, church up in Chicago area, said this: debt comes from wanting more than God's current provision for your life and arranging other ways to get it. Remember, we talked about Ephesians 4:28. It says, stop stealing and work with your hands that you may have something to share with others. That's the verse I say that God never intended for us to spend all of our paycheck on ourselves. Ephesians 4:28. Okay, but Bill Hybels notes in our culture we don't have to abide by that. We can just say, swipe the credit card. As one woman said, I love credit cards. They go so much further than cash. Yep, that's us. Oh, here we are. I have to be careful here. But debt is not a tool for the consumer, but for the banks to become wealthy. Banks have stockholders, investors that expect the bank to make a profit, and that's what they should be doing. But again, that does not take away from us sanctified wisdom on how to use that credit that's available. We'll talk about some ways you should. But did you hear or see the posting this last week of the new thing that's happening with banks and credit cards? I'll actually consult with you. 12 of the largest banks in the U.S. Are now going to start issuing credit cards to people with no credit history. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and you can go back and look up the article. I won't go into all the details on it. It makes a lot of sense. There's something like 40 million, 80 million people out there who don't have a credit score, and there's going to be a system to get them into the system. Okay. Now, I've got to do a little touching on my technology here, and hopefully we're going to see this couple from our church in Fayetteville talk about student debt and what they did to get out of it. Don't do this to me. It's not good. Oh. There. Okay, we're gonna get it now. Just took a while.
We graduated from college at the University of Central Arkansas about 2 years ago now, and whenever we got out of school, we had significant student loan debt, and it was close to six figures. It was right at $96,000 that we had in student loan debt, and we knew right off, it's like, okay, we need to do something about this. So initially we did the Dave Ramsey class, and we just kind of learned then that, hey, we need to be putting more money toward our loans and trying to have that as a focus and as a goal, and so we did, and so we got on track with that. And since then, that's been about 2 years. We have it down to about $18,000 now, and in another 5 months we'll have it completely paid off.
And one thing we learned just through Chris Haas and his ministry was that there are over 2,000 verses in the Bible on finances. So we know that this is something that's close to God's heart, and we know it's important to us as well. And it's definitely something that can make or break your marriage. And we really want to have a hold on finances in our marriage so that we can grow, so that we can give, and really put it towards the right things. The last day of the month, we sit down and go through, look at what we spent where, because on the first day of the month, we use cash to pay for most of our things, and so we can take that cash out on the first day of the month, so we try to be prepared. It was definitely harder at first, those first few months, even the first year we did this, it was a struggle. It was going back and forth and really trying to tweak things and see really where our money was going, and so it's been a growing process and still is, but it definitely gets easier. So I would encourage anybody who's trying to budget to really just try to stay consistent with it and work together, because it takes both of you on the same page in order to make it work.
It's kind of fun targeting those loans and the debt paying off together, because we we're able to look at it each month and say, hey, I worked a little extra, you worked a little extra, hey, we're getting this check, we can put this towards a loan, and we can watch that number go down of what we actually owe on our debt, which is really fun. And I think it's good just working together and important working together on our finances, because it brings us closer, and it's something that you're not going to do with necessarily like a boyfriend or girlfriend, but as that intimacy as a spouse, of being able to sit down and do that together and really plan with our finances and look towards what are our financial goals.
Wow. How about that? I'm not a PC person, so if you can help me here, anybody? Let me see what I got.
Does it exit?
So you go down to the PowerPoint thing on the bottom.
We don't want to do that.
Put the,
How's that? Okay, when to borrow wisely. Because Don Reed doesn't say don't borrow. Okay, banks are here for a reason. When to borrow wisely. 1, when you can purchase an asset that is likely to appreciate. Give me 1 or 2 or 3. Wow, I talked to 2 people in the last week. One on the market 2 days, $29,000 above asking price. And that's typical out there right now. So if you're selling, now's the time to do it. Pack it up and go. If you're too busy to pack it up, call Organizer Chicks, and they'll do it for you along the way. Okay, when you can purchase an asset that's likely to appreciate. Number 2, when the value of the item exceeds the amount of the loan. Probably number 2 after student loans is upside down car loans. And they'll call in, well, I got these 2 cars, Well, how much is your car worth? $25,000. Well, what's the loan on it? $44,000. Well, you better come up with $19,000 because you're not going to get out of that. Dave Ramsey has a formula, and it's this. Don't put in anything with motors and wheels more than 50% of your annual income. Okay? That's not a bad number. Okay? We'll talk about cars in a minute particularly. But there is a limit to what is wise along the way, especially in the context of being a good manager for God. I heard a ad from on a Tulsa station. Come and buy a new car from wherever it was. Don't worry about the loan on your old car. The payment will be less than your current loan. Come buy a new car. What's the math on that? What are they not talking about? How long the loan is going to be? 78 months or 10 years. Nobody drives a car 10 years, probably. So, okay, when the payments don't stress the family budget, because we want to take care of needs. In a lot of the calls to Dave Ramsey, etc., the family budget is stressed. We're making minimum payments, and my wife is not happy, and 80% of marriages and divorces begin with financial stress. Okay, very important for the marriage. Okay, rampant solicitation at the college level. 88% of college graduates have credit card debt upon graduation. Okay, because their folks have taught them to have credit card debt along the way. 19%, this is tragic. 19% of people who file for bankruptcy are college students. 1 out of 5 start their financial life in a disaster. And that, could go on this, but our public schools don't teach personal finance. Our parents don't teach personal finance, and we're all born with no personal financial wisdom. It's really a sad deal, and that's where we end up.
Don, let me ask you,
Sure.
how long has that been going on? Because when I grew up, my mom taught me that stuff, where she was a child living with depression. So.
Yeah, well, his mom taught him. She was a child of depression, taught him, to be responsible with debt. But then we moved in the affluence of the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, boomers, with all due respect, and then credit and living wild. And no education because, we learned like from our parents. And we kind of lost it. But I think the post-World War II boom of prosperity really sent us on a tailspin, a dive.
All more reason I'm thankful for my mom, I guess.
Yes. Yes.
Consumer spending was levers. The rules were changed.
Yeah.
Lend more money, so people that thought they deserved it and had a good job could get crazy money.
Unlimited.
That's when it started. Late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah, it was consumer lending laws were more liberal and more money was out there and you got a good job and everything's increasing and prosperity for all. Yeah. And it's like Christ said, you can't serve God and mammon, and when there's a lot of mammon out there, it's very tempting. In fact, I think it was in Randy Alcorn's book. I was scanning last night. There was a guy who wanted to show Randy his estate. And so they drove around for half a day on the extent of his estate. And when he got back to the house, he said to Randy, well, what do you think? And here was Randy Alcorn's answer. He said, I think you're going to have a hard time leaving it. That's the power of affluence, or the word. Have you heard the word affluenza? That's what we're talking about here. Affluenza, just having too much. you can see the growth of credit cards. I won't take time to go over it, but just growing. Every year it's increasing, and now it's going to be to people without a credit score. Rationalizations for credit cards. I pay it off every month. Actually, 92% of people have good intentions, but then you see that whiz bang thing you got to buy and you don't have the money for it, or an emergency comes and pretty soon you're not making payments every year. My wife and I have credit cards. I disagree with Dave Ramsey saying don't have a credit card. They are a valuable thing, but you got to be able to manage it along the way. Pay it off every month. By the way, do you know, and my wife has done that and I have done that, we have more than one credit card. But you know what we are called by the credit card companies? The very affirming term of deadbeats. We don't get a thing from you. And you're keeping the books for it, and they're keeping the
I
records.
just get an email saying, we're gonna increase your credit. We're gonna, and I'm thinking, I don't even.
Thank you very much. I don't notch your credit.
Let's
Exactly. Yeah.
increase it again. I'll give you more points. It's like,
Yeah.
why?
It's a better way to keep records. That's what my wife and I like about it. We get an statement every month. Thank you very much. It's a more secure way to purchase. Not so anymore. Debit cards have the same guarantees for fraud and recovery and so forth. So this no longer can be an excuse. I want my children to learn to handle money, so I got them a credit card. What do you think? Nah. Now, there is something called a secured credit card, where you can put $250 in, and if they're away college, and they can spend it, but that's all I got to spend until you put some more in. So you have some control over it with some guidance, maybe so, but not just a credit card. We had friends up in South Dakota. Their daughter went to school up in Minneapolis, brought a friend home one weekend, and they were talking to her. Yeah, I have 7 credit cards. Well, how do you pay them off? Oh, I never pay them off. I just run them up to the credit limit and then get a new one.
Oh, wow.
That's under the solicitation clause and bankruptcy for credit card for the cash back. And we have one that's a reward card, but it gets harder and harder to even find where to get to claim the reward. And it's only if your left arm is in a sling and you didn't sleep on Tuesday night, then we will give you that. Yeah, it's a game. Bottom line, here's the bottom line. If a credit card allows you to purchase that which you cannot afford with cash, you need to stop using credit cards. So it's pay it off every 30 days, or, Dave Ramsey, cut them up and pay them off and get out of being a slave. Car payment trap. Most people have car payments for life. They just think that's the way to live. It's not the only way to live. Surprise. This even may be a bit dated, that most people have at least one car payment of $495 a month for 64 months. A couple of us that were in our small group, their car payment was $800 a month. Okay? Not unusual, because we're addicted. Remember, we need our vehicle right after food. Remember in the chart that was up there. If you put that amount in savings at 5% for 4 years, you'd have $1 million at the end of a working career. What's the escape plan? This is not brilliant, but it's practical. Keep your present car for 3 years beyond the end of your car loan payments. And that's how we got out of car loans decades ago. 2, during that time, continue to make the same payment into a car savings account. Okay, you're making the $495, just pay yourself. Become your own bank. Purchase of all future cars previously parentheses, previously owned, because we don't use used cars anymore because that's too pejorative. With cash from that point forward, and that's how you can become free from the car debt. Because cars today, they run 100, 150, 200,000 miles, not like when you and I started, driving cars. You'll be able to buy a 2-3-year-old low mileage dependable car that will meet all your family needs. And you'll have other money to use for other things that are more important. In fact, somebody did a survey and said that only 17% of people in the United States should have an expensive car sitting in their driveway, just from an economic standpoint. To have $40,000 or $50,000 or $60,000 sitting on 4 wheels in your driveway is not wise financially. It had nothing to do with God. Now, you want to guess what area of the country they said could afford that level of car? with the income. Now I can offend another group of people. Maryland, DC, and Northern Virginia. Hello. Okay, mortgages. Only a 15-year loan and then make extra principal payments. That's what my wife and I have done to get out of mortgage. Okay. This is a slide that basically says do 15-year, not 30-year, and you'll save about 30% of your cost on your house. Okay. And the payment was only $200, $250 more a month along the way. The numbers are, but the ratios are good. The numbers are a little off with the percentage. Dave Ramsey. So mortgages, only a 15-year loan. And you say, well, I need a 30-year loan to be able to make the payments. Guess what? You're buying too big a house. I don't have a lot of time except to be direct. Okay, but you're buying too much house. In this very room, about 6 or 7 years ago, we had a seminar for singles at Fellowship. And it was just about filled in here. And I think there were 5 of us on the panel. A realtor, a banker, Chris Haas, who does loan counseling or finance counseling. We'll mention him in the last class. And Lamar Steiger, who was working as resource pastor at the time, and myself. And here was the range. And again, I have had 3 or 4 groups with this. Okay, the banker said, no, the realtor said, you can afford 45% of your monthly income as a house payment.
Which is, by the way, the maximum secondary market loan.
Yeah. The realtor said 33%. And Chris Haas, who works with people, counseling and financial trouble all the time, said never have your house payment more than 25% of your monthly income or you're going to get stressed. Okay. Under good outside counsel, there was a young lady in here who said, oh, this is really good today. This afternoon at 1 o'clock, I have an appointment with a realtor. I'm taking a second look at a house. It's the right house. It's near work. I can entertain. It has a great backyard. It's a quiet. She goes down the whole list. I saw her a little while later. And she said, I said, did you get the house? She goes, no, I took someone along and they saw all the things that was bad about that house. I mean, we get so emotionally into it, we can't see. Okay, so under good counsel. Not consume more than 25, early payoff privilege along the way. Getting rid of debt, again, pretty straightforward, accelerated. And this is found in just about any financial counsel, may or may not apply to you. List all your debts, including personal loans, $1,000 emergency fund. That will keep you from using credit cards when you need a new set of tires or the air conditioning needs charging or whatever it is, the refrigerator goes out or the kids get sick or you're off work for 2 weeks and you don't get paid, whatever. Commit to paying off the smallest debt. Give credit to Dave Ramsey on this because the intuitive thing to do is pay off the one with the with the highest interest rate. That's not recommended, and here's why. You pay off the lowest amount because it's motivating to get one less payment. Everybody get that? So don't do it by the percentage of interest. Do it by what the balance is. Then you got one less, so you can increase the payments on the next one in line along the way. Convert to cash only if you're, have trouble handling credit. Produce extra income. Uber, DoorDash. Grab something? Anyway, do something out there, have garage sales, whatever it is. And if you listen to like Dave Ramsey or some others and listen to people, or Brian and Megan got out of $96,000, they got a, what's the economy apartment, like a one bedroom? Studio apartment. They didn't eat out, they didn't go to movies, and that's how they dropped, $80,000 in 18 months. They're both, one's a PTO, what do I want to say?
PT.
Yeah, PT, one's a PT, not a PTO, that's a power takeoff on a tractor. One is a physical therapist, one's an occupational therapist. So, they didn't have some top-line jobs. They were just regular people who put their shoulder to the deck. Produce extra income. Remove all debt except the mortgage in 24 to 30 months. Commit to paying off the mortgage as early as possible. Use money from the credit card payments to put on your mortgage. and be debt-free. The easiest path to financial freedom is being debt-free. Your paycheck is your most valuable asset. Don't lose it to the creditors. So when you have the pie all divided up, you have nothing left, per the first video we saw. Once you are in control of telling your money where it goes rather than wondering where it went, saving and investment are not that complicated, just difficult. Okay? It's a mathematical equation. Spend less than you earn. Invest the difference. Be financially free along the way. 2 or 3 points just check here in the last 3 or 4 minutes. Well, I have 4 credit cards, 18, whatever. There's an offer to consolidate the debt. Should I do that?
No.
Thank you. 78% of people who consolidate debt fail to resolve the debt, only deal with the symptom. You know, the problem is not how many credit cards you have, it's what you're doing with your credit cards. And that's not going to help even if you just have one. You still see it as, hey, I can just get whatever I want along the way. Bankruptcy, not recommended. Each type of bankruptcy is asking someone else to pay for your spending excesses. We'll see what God says in a moment. Each type asks someone to forgive part or all of your debt. In other words, you're saying, somebody pay for my, excessive living that I've been doing. Be careful about receiving counsel, especially from non-Christians. They will often prematurely recommend bankruptcy. What does God say? The wicked borrow and do not repay, but the righteous give generously. What side of the equation do you want to be on? Okay? Be responsible, pay your bills, get out of debt. Exceptions, when the spouse is left with unpayable debt that will cripple family financially. I could tell some stories about that, but I don't have time. Be open to how God will provide to honor his name and make every effort to repay the debt. Co-signing, again, direct Solomon wisdom. Do not be a man who strikes hands in pledge or puts up security for debts. That means co-signing in our language. If you lack the means to pay, your very bed will be snatched from under you. And here's the stats on it in a moment. One who has no sense. Again, these are God's words. Don't kill the messenger. I'm just reading, okay? One who has no sense shakes hands in pledge and puts up security for a neighbor. That makes no sense for you to do that. And I think this is, 50% of all bank loans with co-signing end up being paid by the co-signer. If the bank, who is in business of checking if you're going to pay back, and they say, that guy can't pay it back. Oh, well, I'll go get my brother and have him sign with me. Guess what? The brother's going to pay the debt half of the time. You might as well, as some cultures, give him the money, and you eliminate all the stress in the family. If you can't afford to give it, if you go to the loan companies, it's 75% of the time you're going to end up paying. Again, not a wise thing to do. And our Romans 12 verse. So, last week and this week, are kind of remember our hump day when we were talking about work? They're kind of the hump day topics, giving and debt. Those are the things that we don't like to talk about along the way. We have a minute or two if there's a question or a pressing question, or then I have one thing I need to communicate from Ray. Yeah, Steve.
I'll give a quick example. I had coffee with a young man who's going to be a missionary.
Okay.
Through fellowship.
Yep.
And he worked for 2 years out of college to pay off all the student loans with the vision to go to an unreached people group in a foreign nation. And that's just a great example of that we're talking about. Because he's being used by God to reach unreached people groups because he focused on
right. And he was willing to make that sacrifice for that. Was he single?
Single.
Yeah, that maybe is easier, but he could put himself to that and not have to worry, well, my spouse, or I got to get a better apartment, or I got to do something. But he focused and he did it. Yes.
We enjoyed housing 3 seminary graduating couples.
Okay.
And the seminary they went to would not allow loans. So we housed them so they could save up for a deposit on a home.
Okay.
And one of them was going to the mission field, and they would eat peanut butter and in the heat of Virginia only use the ceiling fans. They were dedicated to getting ready for Africa.
Yeah.
And all three couples have been extremely successful because they weren't allowed to take loans.
Yeah, so they were kept from getting in trouble, but also had the willingness to pay the price for it and not go to an air conditioning department or whatever it was.
Yep.
They were focused. Yep, Tracy?
Is there a class for the youth regarding education debt?
Is there a class for youth here regarding education? Remember I said last week I did a book report for some teachers for the training center? Do you remember, anybody remember that? Well, in there is one of the Sunday morning student ministry guys, and he and I are in beginning conversation of how can we do something for the youth. You know, you guys, we do it for the adults. You come and, you know, sometimes kids are here, but, you know, I'm pressing in if you want to pray when you think about it, that there would be something given to our young men and women coming up through this system. Yeah. Great question, Tracy. Yeah, yes.
Kind of on that note, my church that I went to as a child had a class like that.
Okay.
I think 8th and 9th grade is when we did it.
Yeah.
And I think it completely transformed how I handled credit cards in college, and
Right.
it was extremely beneficial.
Yeah.
So if this church would do it, I would be thrilled.
Yeah. Too many of our kids are not getting anything at home, at school, until they fall off the cliff and go bankrupt at 17. I mean, what? How do you do that, you know? Anyway, yeah.
It's
Thank
very,
you for
very
that.
beneficial.
Yeah. Maybe can you talk to me afterwards and, you know, even see if we could access whatever the website is and see what they're using and so
Oh,
forth?
gosh.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I have no idea, but.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Okay.
Shirley and I had to cancel a Penny's card because they sent us a big bill there for interest on it for 13 cents and we never got the item, so we canceled it.
Yeah. Yep. We can take action. Be responsible. Okay, note from the admin, 4 people didn't sign in today, so I don't know if you came late or Ray wasn't there, but check with your spouse or whoever, make sure you signed in, because this organization we're working with is saying, what's your attendance? You know, who's there? Who's listening, so forth. So, yeah.
Was there a way to sign in if we watched the the live stream?
That's what we're working on. And here's the conversation this last week since you brought it up. I went to media and said, what's the feedback loop for attenders? Because the organization says, we want people attending or we're not getting the code to them, simply said. So the first answer was not the whole story, in that, well, our live streaming, what you do here is like we do it Sunday morning, and we don't take any attendance in Sunday morning or Sunday services or Saturday, whenever. But then I found out this goes to YouTube. So then, okay, well, does YouTube? Well, the answer is yes, but only head count, not individuals. So, and I sent that to California, and she went, let me think about that. So you can do that, but we are going to require, self-reporting probably, that you're there, because we don't have the system to get the feedback on it, unfortunately. And apparently Zoom does that. If you use Zoom in your companies or something, that you got a list, right? You got a checkup.
Yeah.
Found out YouTube doesn't do that. That's what we're on. So, sorry. Great questions. Okay. Anything else? I'll pray us out. Father in heaven, thank you again for the gift of this day, the gift of these dear people. Father, I just see in their hearts and their eyes a desire to know about you and what you expect from us, and then be on our journey of becoming obedient servants to you. So by your grace, let that happen, just incrementally, week by week, thought by thought, decision by decision. Again, bless these folks as they go back to their families and work and whatever it is this week. And we are just blessed to be called your people, sons and daughters of God. What a joy and what a privilege in Christ's name. Amen. Okay, have a good week. Oh, not next week, remember, July 4th. See you in 2 weeks.
Hey, Don. I have a resource that may have some value on the kids training thing.
Okay.